In 1206, the Mongol Empire formed across the Mongolian steppe, creating a mounted conquest army without treasuries, salaries, or regular coin payments. Early Mongol warfare depended on horses and movement because steppe campaigns outpaced markets and required loyalty systems stronger than delayed monetary wages. Instead of wages, Mongol commanders bound mounted archers to outcomes, where victory, survival, and shared distribution replaced contracts inside imperial campaign camps. Under Genghis Khan, Mongol authorities suppressed tribal rivalry by enforcing predictable reward rules that made obedience safer than defiance within steppe formations. This is History and Society, where we explore how systems quietly shaped civilizations long before people understood what was happening. The Mongol army used a decimal structure, locking mounted soldiers into tens, hundreds, and thousands responsible for collective success and collective punishment. Within Mongol units, a single rider's failure endangered comrades, because discipline on campaign horses depended on shared risk, not individual escape. After conquest, Mongol spoils were gathered near horse lines and felt tense, then redistributed by rank inside imperial mobile camps. Private looting by Mongol soldiers was banned because uncontrolled plunder undermined cavalry discipline and weakened authority across fast-moving steppe armies. By making reward predictable in Mongol campaigns, the system removed bargaining from war and sustained expansion without money across Eurasian territories. Punishment inside Mongol campaign camps was immediate, making theft or defiance dangerous for mounted warriors living under strict imperial steppe discipline. This Mongol reward system replaced wages with certainty, allowing riders to predict outcomes without coin during long imperial campaigns across grasslands and deserts. As Mongol conquests spread beyond the steppe, captured cities introduced grain stores, workshops, and silver reserves into the imperial war economy. These urban resources were absorbed by Mongol administrators, redirected through imperial camps to sustain mounted warbands rather than distributed freely after each conquest. Household registration across conquered territories transformed Mongol warfare into a system that extracted steady supplies instead of relying on repeated destruction. Taxes were assessed in grain, textiles, and livestock, ensuring Mongol warbands received provisions without depending on local markets or unstable coin flows. Mounted warriors were rewarded indirectly through food security, remount horses, captured laborers, and exemptions granted to loyal steppe families. Status inside the Mongol Empire became a form of payment, with rank granting access to herds, grazing rights, marriages, and command authority. These structured rewards tied long-term advancement to obedience, binding Mongol riders to imperial authority beyond individual campaigns. By the 1220s, the Mongol military economy had evolved into a system converting conquest into sustained loyalty without regular monetary pay. As the Mongol host moved deeper into settled lands, distance turned supply into a problem horses and speed alone could not solve. Imperial leaders responded by expanding provisioning networks, replacing constant plunder with organized extraction tied to conquered farmland and workshops across the empire. Way stations known as the Yam appeared along major routes, stocked with food, fodder, and fresh horses for traveling warriors daily. These Yam stations allowed Mongol riders to move without carrying money, depending instead on imperial obligation enforced across steppe regions. Administrators recorded households, herds, and output, converting conquered populations into predictable inputs for the Mongol war economy during sustained campaigns. This registration shifted warfare from episodic raiding toward continuous extraction that sustained long campaigns without exhausting mobile warbands over time. Provisioning reduced pressure on local markets, preventing shortages that could slow Mongol hosts moving between regions and seasons during extended operations. Imperial oversight limited commander discretion, keeping distribution rules consistent across distant camps and newly conquered territories throughout the expanding empire. As long as extraction remained orderly, Mongol warriors trusted the system to reward service without constant negotiation or force reliably. By mid-century, logistics became as decisive as weapons, quietly reshaping how the Mongol Empire sustained expansion across vast Eurasian territories. As the empire widened, differences emerged between core Mongol warbands and newly incorporated fighters from conquered regions under imperial oversight. Veteran steppe warriors retained priority access to horses, plunder shares, and command authority within imperial camps during long campaigns abroad. Newly absorbed fighters were provisioned by the Mongol state, but rarely integrated into reward structures or leadership circles within imperial camps. This imbalance preserved Mongol dominance while limiting cohesion across the expanding host, especially during distant campaigns under centralized oversight pressures. Administrators struggled to maintain equal distribution as distances multiplied, and regional conditions varied across imperial territories over time during expansion. Some regions produced grain reliably, while others yielded silver, textiles, or forced labor for imperial needs during campaigns abroad sustained. Converting diverse resources into uniform support strained coordination between camps, routes, and registers across the empire during long operations everywhere. Delays in provisioning revived local requisition, weakening trust in predictable rewards promised by imperial law inside Mongol camps during strain. Commanders gained discretion over distribution, making proximity to leadership more important than formal rules for advancement within imperial hosts everywhere. By the 1250s, the Mongol payment system still functioned, but efficiency replaced equality as the empire prioritized control over cohesion. Succession disputes after imperial deaths disrupted the shared authority that once enforced consistent reward and punishment across Mongol camps and routes. Rival princes gathered hosts around personal loyalties, redirecting tribute flows and weakening central oversight within Khanate territories during expansion years. Distribution rules varied between Khanates, breaking predictability that warriors relied upon while traveling between camps and distant provinces under imperial strain. Some regions increased taxation to sustain hosts, while others intensified plunder, reviving older pressures on towns and pastoral communities across Eurasia. Administrative registers continued to exist, but coordination between offices weakened as authority fragmented across competing Mongol polities over time periods. Supply routes fractured as political trust declined, forcing hosts to rely on local arrangements instead of imperial guarantees during campaigns. Warriors measured loyalty against immediate benefit, shifting allegiance toward leaders who promised quicker rewards within nearby territories and camps frequently. Elite retinues secured privileges locally, no longer guaranteed by empire-wide law or shared distribution mechanisms within Mongol realms during decline. Campaigns slowed as provisioning uncertainty grew, reducing the ability to mobilize hosts quickly across vast distances of Eurasian routes networks. The system endured in parts, yet without unity, its mechanisms produced power unevenly and increasingly failed to scale empire-wide structures. As imperial unity weakened, Mongol hosts increasingly depended on regional arrangements rather than empire-wide systems to sustain warriors during extended campaigns. Local leaders controlled tribute flows, using nearby grain stores, herds, and workshops to reward followers within specific Khanate territories. This localization reduced coordination, making distant campaigns harder to support without shared registers or trusted distribution routes. Warriors traveling between regions encountered inconsistent rewards, weakening confidence in imperial guarantees once enforced across camps and roads. Some Khanates emphasized taxation from cities, while others leaned on tribute from pastoral communities and trade routes. These differences reflected local conditions, but eroded the sense of a single Mongol system governing reward and obligation. Administrative tools still existed, yet their reach shrank as authority became personal rather than institutional. Hosts assembled more slowly as leaders negotiated resources before movement instead of relying on established imperial flows. The system no longer scaled smoothly, producing strength in some regions, while leaving others undersupported and unstable. By the late 13th century, Mongol power persisted, but its sustaining mechanisms had lost coherence across the broader empire. Without unified oversight, reward systems depended on personal authority, making loyalty conditional and fragile within Mongol hosts operating across divided territories. This shift encouraged competition among leaders, as promises of richer shares attracted warriors away from distant obligations and weakened shared discipline. In eastern regions, monetized taxation expanded, while Western Khanates relied more heavily on tribute, trade quarters, and negotiated extraction systems locally. Different reward practices shaped behavior, producing uneven loyalty patterns that complicated coordination between camps, routes, and seasonal movements across Khanate territories. Attempts to restore central control faced resistance, as regional elites guarded revenues that sustained their own hosts and followers locally entrenched. Without predictable flows, long-distance campaigns became risky, forcing leaders to prioritize nearby objectives over distant imperial ambitions during late 13th century. This contraction reduced pressure on supply networks but narrowed the strategic reach that once defined Mongol expansion across Eurasian lands formerly connected. Over time, warriors adapted expectations, accepting varied rewards tied to local rulers rather than uniform imperial standards, once enforced system-wide. The payment system no longer unified the empire, instead mirroring its political fragmentation and shifting balances of power between Khanates. What remained was a legacy of methods that had enabled conquest, but could not survive division and rivalry without central unity. The Mongol Empire did not lose power because warriors went unpaid, but because the system that aligned reward and obedience could no longer operate uniformly. Payment had never meant coins alone. It meant predictable access to plunder, tribute, provisions, status, and protection within imperial structures. When unity held, these mechanisms bound riders across distances larger than any previous empire had attempted to control. When unity fractured, the same mechanisms turned inward, serving local rulers instead of a shared imperial order. Each Khanate preserved pieces of the old system, but without coordination, those pieces no longer reinforced one another. Extraction continued, posts still formed, and campaigns still occurred, yet coherence faded across routes, camps, and administrative centers. What once scaled effortlessly across Eurasia now stalled under negotiation, rivalry, and uneven resource control between regions. The Mongol payment system had been efficient, adaptable, and powerful, but it depended entirely on centralized authority to function. Without that authority, no amount of tribute, taxation, or tradition could restore the earlier balance. In this way, how the Mongol Empire paid its warriors explains not only its rise, but also the limits of its endurance.